Hi, I'm Ann with Clinton Parkway Nursery, and we're doing a series of workshops on YouTube for this season so that you'll be safe and you can listen to them whenever you want at home. We're at the corner of Clinton Parkway and Wakarusa in Lawrence, Kansas. So if you're driving by, look for the flowers on the roof. That's kind of our trademark. So I'm going to say varieties. There's I'm going to say several different types. There is there's an heirloom. Okay, heirloom are simply old varieties. They're what they call open pollinated, which means they will grow true from seed on that. Now, if you put two heirlooms together and they cross pollinate, it's not A and B anymore; it's C on that. So if you want to save the seed, you need to plant them by themselves so that they are all pollinated by, say, Cherokee Purple or whatever your heirloom is. Some people tout that the heirloom tastes better. They taste good. They taste like tomatoes to me. Yeah, and so that's your heirloom. Okay, and then there's determinate and indeterminate, which that's important depending upon if you're doing a raised bed, not a raised bed, but a container garden. Okay, determinate tomatoes reach a point and stop on that. They don't get huge. They still will get pretty good size, but they don't get so huge. You've heard people say, oh, well, my tomato's 8 foot tall. Those are the indeterminate. They just keep growing. They get taller and taller and taller. They'll bloom all summer long, or grow all summer long. Mine go the top of the cage down to the bottom or across the ground, and that's okay. I like them. Determinate have a tendency, a characteristic, that they produce a lot of fruit at once. They kind of rest, and then they'll produce another batch on that. So which makes it good if you want a can or something like that, but you want them all ripening at once. If you want I want to eat some fresh every day, and you've got room, the indeterminate would be better for that because they continue to produce a little bit all the time. And there's still a lot of it, let's say. And then your fourth kind is a grafted tomato. And what they have done is, this was developed by the farmer market type people, because in the farmer market world, the first tomato gets the most money. And so they put them in houses, and what happens, they put them in the ground. Well, after a while, you build up disease. So they have this, it's almost a wild tomato that they graft as a rootstock, and then they have the top is their favorite, their top on that. And they use it a lot with heirlooms because heirlooms have no disease resistant whatsoever on that. And so they're able to grow something that normally you get 2 or 3 fruits. You know, I've grown some of the heirlooms on their own rootstock and I get 3 tomatoes. It's like, so what? You know, well, the grafted, you're going to get more tomatoes. And they even do them on the traditional or the name varieties because they'll produce more. It's a tougher, meaner root system, and they're able to graft it onto that and get better production. If you do a grafted tomato, when we get to the planting, you do not bury it deep, because if you bury it deep, you lose the graft, and you just spent big money for that graft on that. So don't bury the grafted ones as deep as you will the other ones. Okay. And then I'm going to say site selection, and I'm going to leave it with the idea that think about you're planting them in the ground, you're planting raised beds, or you're doing containers. And actually, to me, raised beds and containers are kind of the same thing. In the ground, you can do some of the big ones. Yes, you'll have to stake them. You'll have to stake an indeterminate tomato, but you have room to do it. In a pot or in a raised bed, you may not have quite as much room, so that may restrict the variety that you select. On your yellow sheet, I put some. This was some of the varieties that probably change, but this was some of the varieties that we carry, and it breaks it down. I don't have a copy, so I'm going to guess. It breaks it down into sizes and whether, does it break it down into, yes, okay, it's got disease resistance. Okay, which to me is important. It's not super crucial unless you've had issues. Most homeowners don't have issues with disease, with soil-borne diseases. These are soil-borne diseases, so it's VFMT. Okay, V stands for verticillium wilt, Fusarium is fusarium wilt, or F is fusarium wilt, VF. N is nematodes, T is tobacco mosaic. And you don't have to write that down. That's a good trivia question, but you don't need to know it. They even now have V1, V2, N1, N2, tobacco 1, 2, because they're different strains. These are diseases that the tomatoes are resistant to. If you'll talk to people, they'll say, oh, you've got to rotate your tomatoes. You can't plant them in the same place every year. The reason you do that is because of disease resistance. Now, sometimes, like in the ground, it may be, you know what? I have room for 2 tomatoes on the south side of my house, up against the house, and that's the only place I can plant them, and I really want tomatoes. So plant them there, and do it again next year, and do it again next year. And don't worry about it unless a problem develops, and then we'll have to talk about it. But normally, the homeowner doesn't have problems with that. If you can, that's a great practice. If you can't, that's okay on that. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant are all in the same family, so that applies to all of them on that you rotate around. It isn't like, I'll move the tomatoes, I'll flip the tomatoes and peppers each year. Well, it doesn't really make any difference because they're the same family on that. So, yeah. So that's kind of, depending on what you're going to do. Okay, improving the soil. The better the soil, the better the plant. And this is kind of my philosophy that I tell people is, if I have, you know, I don't have a lot of space for my garden. So I want to grow, if I want to grow a lot of things, I want to grow everything, push it as much as I can so that I can grow as much as I can from that plant. So instead of growing 5 tomato plants, I can grow 2 on that. And I'm pushing and pushing so I get maximum production. If I get maximum production, instead of 5 tomato plants, I have 2. I have room for planting something else on that. So the better the soil, the better the plants are going to do. And you're never done, particularly with the garden, you're never done improving the soil. So the Cottonburg compost is excellent to amend the soil. If you have a compost pile, that's fine. If you don't, you know, you've got to buy something. I like this one. When you dig into it, you'll find that it is chunky. And I think that's part of its secret. It doesn't break down quite as quick as some of the others. You know, there's also, I call it the rule of first. Whichever one you found first that you liked is usually the best. It doesn't mean it's the best as far as you're concerned. And so this is kind of our rule of first on that. It's one that we found that is really, really good. And I think because of the texture of it, it lasts a long time compared to some of your other composts. It does a very, very good job of breaking up clay soils, which is what we have on that. Keep in mind that you should apply compost or some type of organic matter each year, okay? You're going to take that tomato plant at the end of the year. I don't know if I'm going to tell you this later, so I'll tell you now. At the end of the year, this tomato plant gets pulled up and it gets put in the dumpster because of those diseases on that, so that way, hopefully, you can keep it clean. Well, think about the forest. You have this big tree. It drops its leaves every year. No one rakes them up and puts them at the curb, so they break down. They make the soil better. Next year, it leaves out. It repeats that process. You can't repeat the process. You just took your leaves and you put them at the curb. And that's okay, because you need to on that. But we need to replenish them, and so that's what we're going to do with the compost.
And now you have to spade that in, too. You can't just apply it on the surface.
You can spade it in, you can plant with it, you can put it on the surface. Because if you put it on the surface, you do it before you plant, you're going to work it in because you're digging a hole on that. If it's very poor soil, I would suggest working it in, and then you can use it again on top. Okay. I don't plant my tomatoes in the ground anymore because my spot is too shady now. So I built raised beds, so it's a little bit different, but it's kind of the same. When I did my tomatoes in the ground, I put compost. I have compost. I put it on 5 times a year. Okay, now you think, oh my God, that's a lot of work. No, it's not. Okay, here's what I did. On the fall, I raked up the leaves, and you know the leaves don't all fall at once. So I took the first round, I ground them up in my mower, I put them on top. There's one. Okay? And then you know, they don't all fall at the same time. So I took the last load and I did that with. I ground them up, I put them bed edge to edge, and there's 2. But I didn't want them to blow away in the winter, so I put compost on top of them. There's 3. When I planted them with compost. There's 4. And then when they got up a little bit, I mulched them with compost.